The house settled around him with a sound like bone against bone, and Thomas Keller stood perfectly still in the hallway, one hand pressed flat against the freshly painted wall. 3:47 in the morning. The house had been making noises for weeks now, small complaints of old wood adjusting to new renovations. But this was different. This was footsteps. Above him, where there was no room for footsteps to be. He told himself it was the wind. He told himself it was the plumbing, the settling of 100-year-old joists, the house breathing in its sleep. But his architect's mind knew every beam and stud of this place. He had stripped it down to skeleton and rebuilt it, and there was no space between the second-floor ceiling and the roof where a person could walk. No space at all. The footsteps stopped. Thomas exhaled slowly, tasting copper in his mouth. He had been holding his breath without realizing it. His daughter's door stood slightly ajar at the end of the hall, and he could hear the soft, mechanical whisper of her sound machine, that endless loop of rain that helped her sleep. She was 7. She believed the house was magic because it was old and had a turret and secret compartments in the baseboards where servants used to hide letters. She did not need to know her father was losing his mind. 6 months earlier, the house had been a different animal entirely. Thomas had walked through it on a gray afternoon in March with the realtor, a woman who kept apologizing for the smell. The previous owner had died in the living room. Natural causes, the realtor assured him. Very natural. Very old. The house had sat empty for 2 years while the estate was settled, and in that time raccoons had made homes in the attic. Water had found its way through the roof, and black mold had spread through the walls like a secret religion. But Thomas had seen past all that. He had seen the bones, the original crown molding, the parquet floors beneath the water-stained carpet, the pocket doors, and the stained glass in the widow's walk that looked out over the maple trees of suburban Cleveland. His wife had died 3 years earlier, and he and Lily had been living in a sterile apartment that smelled like other people's cooking. They needed a project. They needed a home. He had gutted the place over 4 months, had ripped out the rotted plaster and the knob and tube wiring and the horsehair insulation that crumbled like ash in his hands. He had walked every inch of the structure, had traced the path of every pipe and duct and joist. He knew this house better than he knew himself. So why did he keep hearing footsteps? The first time had been 3 weeks ago. He had been in his home office, sketching elevations for a client project, when he heard someone walking across the floor above him. Slow, deliberate steps. He had climbed the stairs 2 at a time and found nothing. Empty bedrooms, empty hallways. Lily had been at school. He had been alone. He had blamed his imagination. Grief did strange things. The anniversary of his wife's death was coming up, and maybe his mind was playing tricks. He had poured himself into the renovation, into making this house perfect for Lily, and maybe he had forgotten to rest, to breathe, to grieve properly. But then it happened again, and again, always late at night or early in the morning when the world was quiet enough to hear. Always footsteps where no footsteps should be. Thomas moved down the hallway now, his bare feet silent on the runner carpet he had installed himself. He stopped outside Lily's room and pushed the door open wider. She was a small shape under the quilt. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. The sound machine hummed its mechanical rain. The nightlight glowed soft amber in the corner, casting shadows that looked like reaching hands. He had installed a camera in her room last week. Just a small one, tucked into the bookshelf between the stuffed animals. He told himself it was for safety, to check on her remotely when he was working late, but really it was because of the footsteps. Because of the growing certainty that something was wrong with this house. Thomas backed out of the room and closed the door to just a crack. He stood in the hallway and looked up at the ceiling. The plaster was smooth, freshly painted in a warm cream that the designer had called morning linen. He had installed recessed lighting up there himself. He had been in the attic space multiple times during the renovation. It was a standard attic, accessible through a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. Insulation, ductwork, roof trusses. Nothing more. But something made him walk to the access panel now. Something made him reach up and pull the cord. The ladder unfolded with a creak of springs, and the dark mouth of the smell hit him first. Not the dusty insulation smell he remembered. Something else. Something organic and wrong. He grabbed the flashlight from the hall closet and climbed the ladder, his heart doing a strange, stuttering rhythm against his ribs. The attic was exactly as he remembered it. Plywood flooring he had installed himself. Pink insulation rolled between the joists. The silver snake of the air conditioning duct running along the south wall. His flashlight beam swept across familiar shapes, found nothing unusual. He exhaled and started to turn back toward the ladder. That was when he saw the seam. It was subtle, a line in the far wall that did not quite match. He had framed this space himself, and he did not remember that line. Thomas moved closer, his flashlight beam narrowing to a point. The wall was not a wall. It was a panel, painted to match, nearly invisible. His hand shook as he pressed against it. The panel swung inward on silent hinges, and the smell that rolled out was unmistakable now. Human, sweat and breath and something else. Something lived in. The crawl space beyond was not large, maybe 6 feet by 8. But someone had made it a home. There was a camping mattress on the floor, the sleeping bag still rumpled, the pillow still holding the impression of a head. Thomas reached out and touched the mattress. It was warm. His flashlight beam jerked across the space, catching details like photographs. A backpack, bottles of water, granola bar wrappers, a bucket in the corner that he did not want to think about. And on the far wall, mounted on a small wooden shelf, a laptop computer glowing soft blue in the darkness. Thomas moved closer, his entire body shaking now. The laptop screen showed a grid of 4 images. Security camera feeds. He recognized them immediately. The kitchen, the living room, the front porch, and Lily's bedroom. The camera must have been hidden better than his own. He could see his daughter sleeping in perfect clarity, could see the rise and fall of her breathing, could see her hand curled against her cheek. The timestamp in the corner said 3:51 a.m., real time, live feed. Thomas heard himself make a sound, not a word, just a sound. Someone had been living above them, watching his daughter. For how long? He thought of all the small things that had seemed wrong over the past months. The sense of being watched. The missing food he had blamed on Lily's late-night snacking. The feeling that objects in the house had been moved, just slightly, just enough to notice. His work laptop that he could have sworn he had closed but found open. The bathroom that sometimes smelled like shampoo he did not use. How long had this person been here? How many nights had they climbed down from this hidden space and walked through his home while he and Lily slept? How many mornings had they watched through these cameras, learning their routines, their habits, their lives? Thomas backed out of the crawl space, his breath coming in short gasps now. He needed to call the police. He needed to get Lily out of the house. He needed to not panic, but his hands would not stop shaking and his vision was tunneling, and he could hear his own pulse like drums in his ears. He was halfway to the ladder when he heard the sound, the front door, opening downstairs. Someone was coming home. Thomas froze. The house had always been good at carrying sound, and he could hear everything now with perfect clarity. The door closing softly, the click of the lock, footsteps in the foyer. Slow, unhurried, the footsteps of someone who belonged. He thought of Lily, asleep in her room. He thought of the cameras, the monitoring, the months of watching. He thought of the warm mattress and knew with absolute certainty that whoever had been living up here was not some random squatter. This was planned. This was intentional. This was something worse than breaking and entering. This was obsession. Thomas moved to the attic access and looked down. He could see a slice of the hallway below, the cream-colored walls, the runner carpet. He could hear the footsteps coming up the stairs now. He had maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. He climbed down the ladder as quietly as he could, but the springs creaked, and he heard the footsteps on the stairs pause. For a moment, the house was completely silent. Then the footsteps resumed faster now, and Thomas ran. He ran to Lily's room and scooped her up from the bed. She made a small, confused sound but did not wake. She was heavy in his arms, 7 years old and solid, and he held her tight against his chest as he ran for the stairs. Behind him, he heard the attic ladder being climbed, heard the sound of someone moving fast through the space above. Thomas hit the stairs at a sprint, one hand wrapped around Lily's head to protect it, the other gripping the banister. He could hear footsteps above him now, tracking him, and realized with sick certainty that the intruder knew the house as well as he did, knew the creaky board on the landing, knew which steps to skip, knew every shortcut and secret. He reached the front door and fumbled with the deadbolt. His hands were shaking too hard, and Lily was waking up now, starting to squirm and ask questions in a sleep-thick voice. "Daddy? What's happening? Where are we going?" "It's okay, baby. We're going to the car. We're going on an adventure." The deadbolt turned. Thomas pulled the door open and stumbled out onto the porch. The October air was cold against his face, and he realized he was barefoot, wearing only the t-shirt and sweatpants he had slept in. His car keys were on the hook by the door. He had grabbed them without thinking. He ran for the car, gravel biting into his bare feet. Lily was crying now, scared and confused, and he kept saying, it's okay," even though nothing was okay. He reached the car and pulled open the back door, buckled Lily into her booster seat with shaking hands. She was asking questions, demanding to know what was happening, why were they leaving, where were they going, and he could not answer because he did not know. He slammed the door and ran around to the driver's side. That was when he saw the figure in the upstairs window, not the attic, Lily's bedroom, standing exactly where Thomas had stood minutes earlier, looking down at them. The light from the nightlight cast the figure in amber silhouette. Not tall, average height, slim build. The figure raised one hand in a slow wave. Thomas fumbled the keys, dropped them, snatched them up. His hands would not work right. Finally, he got the key in the ignition and started the car. The headlights illuminated the front of the house. The Victorian gingerbread trim he had restored so carefully, the fresh paint, the perfect landscaping. Home. He threw the car into reverse and backed out of the driveway too fast, tires screaming on the asphalt. Lily was sobbing in the back seat. Thomas grabbed his phone with one shaking hand and dialed 911. 911. What is your emergency? Someone's in my house. Someone's been living in my house. They've been watching us. They've been watching my daughter. He gave the address, answered the dispatcher's questions, tried to keep his voice calm for Lily's sake, but failed completely. The dispatcher told him to drive somewhere safe and wait for the police. He drove to the gas station 3 blocks away, the only thing open at 4 in the morning, and parked under the fluorescent lights. Lily had stopped crying. She sat in her booster seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit, and looked at him with eyes too wide and too knowing. Is someone bad in our house, Daddy? Thomas turned around in his seat and took her hand. It was so small in his, so fragile. Yes, baby, but the police are going to take care of it. You're safe. I promise you're safe. But even as he said it, he thought of the cameras, the watching, the months of surveillance. He thought of how the intruder had known exactly where to install the cameras to see everything. How they had learned Lily's routine, her schedule, her room. He thought of the laptop screen with its grid of feeds, thought of how many recordings might exist, and felt sick. The police arrived at the house within minutes. Thomas gave them the keys and sat in the gas station parking lot with Lily wrapped in a blanket the paramedics had given her. He watched the police go in, watched the lights come on in the house, room by room, watched officers emerge and speak into radios. They found the crawl space, they found the cameras. They found evidence that suggested the intruder had been living there for at least 4 months. Since July, since 2 weeks after Thomas and Lily had moved in. They did not find the intruder. A detective came to talk to Thomas as the sun was starting to rise. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes that had seen too much. She asked questions, took notes, explained that they were dusting for prints, checking the laptop for data, pulling the camera footage. She said they would find whoever did this, but Thomas knew they would not. He knew it in the hollow place in his chest where certainty lived. Whoever had been living in his attic was not some opportunistic criminal. This was someone who had planned, someone who had watched the renovation from afar, had waited for the perfect moment, had integrated themselves into the structure of the house itself. The detective asked if Thomas had any idea who might do this, any enemies, anyone with a grudge, anyone who had shown unusual interest in the house or the renovation. Thomas thought of all the contractors who had worked on the house, the electricians and plumbers and painters, the inspector who had walked through at the end, the neighbors who had stopped by to welcome them to the street, the realtor who had sold them the house, the estate attorney who had handled the sale. So many people had known the layout, had seen the plans, had access. No, he heard himself say, no one. They let him and Lily go to a hotel when the sun was fully up. A nice place downtown with a pool and room service and thick curtains that blocked out all the light. Lily fell asleep watching cartoons, exhausted from the terror of the night. Thomas sat in a chair by the window and stared at nothing. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have looked. Thomas stared at the message. His hands started shaking again. He thought about blocking the number but knew it would not matter. Whoever this was, they were not going to stop. They had been in his walls. They knew everything about him. About Lily. Another text came through. "I'll be seeing you." Thomas deleted the messages, blocked the number, but he knew it meant nothing. You could not block someone who had already been inside, someone who had watched you sleep, someone who knew the rhythm of your breathing and the sound of your daughter's laugh in the exact way you liked your coffee in the morning. The police would do their investigation. They would dust and photograph and analyze. Eventually, they would tell him it was safe to go back to the house. They would catch the intruder, or they would not. Life would return to normal, or it would not. But Thomas knew one thing with absolute certainty as he sat in that hotel room, watching his daughter sleep. He would never feel safe again. Every house would have hidden spaces. Every room would have watching eyes. Every sound in the night would be footsteps. Because the worst thing was not that someone had been living in his attic. The worst thing was that he had never noticed. The house had tried to tell him. It had creaked and settled and made its strange bone sounds in the night. It had whispered warnings in the language of old wood and shifting foundations. But he had not listened. He had been too busy making it perfect. Too busy building a home. Now, when he closed his eyes, all he could see was that glowing laptop screen, the grid of camera feeds, his daughter sleeping, captured in perfect digital clarity, watched by eyes he had never seen. He opened his eyes and looked at Lily, curled up on the hotel bed with her rabbit clutched to her chest. She looked so small, so vulnerable. He had promised to keep her safe, and he had failed. Someone had been living above her, watching her, for months, and he had never known. Thomas stood and walked to the window. Cleveland sprawled out below, a city of in-houses and buildings and a million hidden spaces. Somewhere out there, the person who had lived in his attic was walking free. Watching, waiting. His phone buzzed again. He did not look at it. Outside, the morning light was cold and gray, and the city looked like a place where anything could be hiding. Thomas pressed his forehead against the glass and tried not to think about going home. Tried not to think about all the houses he had designed over the years, all the spaces between walls and floors and ceilings that he had created without ever considering what might fill them. The house was still standing on its quiet street in suburban Ohio. The police were still inside, cataloging evidence. And somewhere in the city, someone was smiling, thinking about the warm mattress in the attic and the girl with dark hair who slept with a sound machine, and the father who had finally looked up. But by then, it was already too late.
The scripted casebook remains open. Subscribe to the archive. Share the evidence. Leave your verdict below. Some secrets are better shared.